Welcome, Calvary, to The Weekly, a podcast by Calvary Bible Church, connecting what happens over the weekend to your real life lived, with your host, Jay Ewing. And in the podcast studio today, I have Perry Marshall, Melissa Christensen. How's it going?
Great.
Going well, Jay.
Happy St. Patty's Day.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know when this podcast will be released, but it is St. Patty's Day today.
It is, and we're in a green room.
We are in a green room.
That's true.
I know.
Wow.
And Perry and I are wearing green.
Yes, and I'm too on my shoes. Hey, we have an episode.
Doesn't count. It's like saying you have green eyes. I have green eyes, so I don't have to wear green.
Doesn't count.
Hey, we have an episode today about what we are reading this month. The book is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. So if you've never read The Screwtape Letters, this is a great book to put on your bookshelf or your Kindle shelf. And go to Amazon. You can find the link below to get there to get your copy of The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. This is going to be a great episode. It sort of lines up with the sermon series we're in today at Calvary called The Battle Ready. And it's about a battle being waged in our lives in the kingdom of God in Ephesians 6, where we put on the armor of God. And the theme for this battle in this series is finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God. And so the Screwtape Letters are a great addition to this sermon series, we believe. So I had Perry and Melissa read the Screwtape Letters along with me and sort of give you a sort of large preview of what to expect as you read the Screwtape Letters. Anything I'm leaving out, Melissa?
No, I would just say if you've read the Screwtape Letters, but it's been a long time maybe, go back and reread it.
That's a great encouragement.
Because I think a lot of people have read it, not everyone. But I hadn't read it in many, many years, and it was always something good in there. It was good.
That's awesome. Perry, any reflections there from you?
It's a classic.
It's a classic.
It is a classic. Bona fide classic. Yeah, a lot of people have benefited greatly from reading the Screwtape Letters over the years. I would throw my name in that circle of people too. It's a great book.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we would love for Calvary people to be about reading great books, getting involved in these resources that we're presenting with you. So if you want to go check out some other podcasts about books we've been reading, you can go to calvarybible.com/theweekly and look up the titles, what we are reading, and you can find the other two books we have read and we are recommending. And then Screwtape Letters is the third book in our series. Okay, so Melissa, will you give us a brief introduction to the Screwtape Letters and what they are about?
Sure. I'm just going to read it straight from Amazon, because isn't that where we all go to look at what books are about?
Very true.
Yeah. The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis is a classic masterpiece of religious satire that entertains readers with its sly and ironic portrayal of human life and foibles from the vantage point of Screwtape, who's a highly placed assistant to, quote unquote, our father below. At once, wildly comic, deadly serious, and strikingly original, C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters is the most engaging account of temptation and triumph over it ever written.
That's a really big sentence.
Ever written.
Yeah, and it's probably pretty true. We were just talking about this before we went live on the podcast, that probably Jonathan Edwards in the hands of the sinners in the hands of an angry God is probably the second greatest classical work on this sort of temptation narrative writing genre. So sort of interesting, in July 20th of 1940, C.S. Lewis was listening to a speech on the BBC given by Hitler. So this is pre-World War II.
Interesting.
And it really scared him what Hitler was talking about and the ways in which he was communicating his vision for Germany. And he came up with this idea after that speech. And it was a sort of like a book he wanted to write about one devil to another, and a retired devil sort of mentoring a new devil who had a new patient, was sort of his idea that he wrote to his brother saying, I'm going to write this. So in 1942, he released this book, and it was put to press 8 different times in 1 year. That's how many people read this book.
That's crazy.
Which is pretty insane.
Screwtape is the elder devil. Would we call him that?
Yep.
And Wormwood is the person he's writing the letters to. And we never actually read any of Wormwood's words.
Yeah.
We just hear through Screwtape's vision.
Yeah, it's brilliant in that.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing we got to understand about Screwtape Letters is that it's a point of view, and it's Christian satire, so satirical in its nature, and that's really important. And actually, how do you feel like that role reversal of that perspective helps you read this or glean some new understandings from this book?
I'd say for me, Jay, it's just a fresh perspective. Like when you read about the devil in Scripture, obviously we're reading about it from a certain perspective, from a vantage point of being citizens of the kingdom, of being children of God, and we're reading, like, for example, Paul's words in Ephesians 6, like you already mentioned. Now, obviously, Paul's writing about Satan from a vantage point that is very different from what C.S. Lewis decides to do with the Screwtape Letters. And in that way, I think it gives us a fresh perspective and even maybe a more well-rounded out kind of understanding of the devil and his schemes and how we need to guard ourselves against his schemes. Not to put the Screwtape Letters on a level comparable with Scripture at all,
Right.
Obviously. This is not inspired the same way Scripture is inspired, but it does help us just think about all of the schemes of the devil in a new, fresh way.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking just this morning, actually, as I finished reading it, last minute there, procrastinator, how interesting it would be, and maybe this exists out there, if somebody would write a book about the actual subject that they're tracking in this. So the man in this book that the younger devil Wormwood is kind of following. It'd be so interesting to hear his perspective.
Yeah, like the Christian point of view
Right.
from
And
the whole narrative.
Yeah, and what it feels like to him as a human as all of this is going on.
Yeah, that's really true. The thing that strikes me with the Screwtape Letters is that Wormwood is instructed not to attempt to win this patient soul through argument, but rather fixing his attention on streams of immediate sense of experiences. So it's basically distractions more than the destroying of his Christian life.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me. And that sort of sets up the whole book of what we're reading, why we're reading it, and really gives you a lens to view your own life.
Yeah, so one example of that early in the book, and I'm going to be referencing early in the book a lot because I have not recently read the Screwtape Letters except for skimming the early part of the book. So this is fresh in my mind.
So my advice earlier about rereading it, that was for you, Perry.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So early in the book, it talks about how this subject is he's become a believer and he's entering into the church, and how that's not a great thing from the perspective of the devils of Wormwood, and the advice that's being given by the elder devil, the demon here, is to just get the subject distracted in the church. Get the subject distracted by the annoyance of the people around him. The way they look weird, they talk weird, maybe they just have little quirks about them that is something that drives him crazy. And after a while, he becomes so disenchanted with who these Christians are that he's pretty sure he can't possibly be included among them. How they're all hypocrites, for example, and how would you want to be associated with somebody like that? So it's just that unique perspective of like, okay, yeah, Satan isn't overtly going out and planting a lie in this person's mind, or, it's not some voice that he hears in his head other than just the kind of everyday kinds of thoughts that we might have, but get him to believe just a partially true thing, not a fully true thing about who these people are and who he is in relationship to them.
Yeah, that's very true and good insight, Perry, to this book and our own lives. What about you, Melissa, about the highs and lows of the Christian faith that you found really helpful in this book?
I'm going to read this section on page 40 where Lewis kind of talks about that. It says, "Do not be deceived, Wormwood. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy's will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys. And I just love that because I think we all know and have learned through our own experience about the highs and lows of our spiritual lives, and are very aware of how God can use those to form and shape our character. But the importance of understanding that those highs and lows also provide opportunities, great opportunities even, for the devil to come in and steer things in a different direction.
Right. Lewis is a brilliant and understanding sort of human nature and sort of the story that we find ourselves in. And he just has this uncanny sense and style of writing that like captures that brilliantly. And sometimes that's not easily read. You sort of have to read him and think about him and have a conversation in order to understand where he's going. But he's brilliant for sure.
Definitely.
What about, we talked about, we have these stories that we're living in, and like when we talk and we read about Screwtape Letters, we'll find ourselves in each chapter somewhere different than maybe we thought we were going to be. And I'll explain that this way. Like when you're reading Screwtape Letters, you're like, oh man, that was me like yesterday, or that was me 2 weeks ago with the temptation, or that was me with these people that I was hanging out with.
Yeah.
And Melissa, you shared a story about last Wednesday, even at work, of what you found in the Screwtape Letters.
Yeah, we were just talking about that this morning. Jay walked in. He said, wow, it's really quiet here. And I said, yeah, Wednesdays are pretty quiet. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. And I kind of count on them as being a day for me to play catch up with the things that happen in meetings on Mondays and Tuesdays and all of that good stuff. So a couple nights ago, I was reading this on page 111. And it says, now you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time, which he reckoned on having at his own disposal and is unexpectedly taken from him. I hate it when people take my time.
I have no idea
true.
what you're talking about. Can't relate.
You can't relate at all.
No.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah,
when you think like your plan for the day goes one way or is one thing and then goes a totally different direction, which never happens with kids.
No.
Or actually any other human interaction.
Human being. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah, Jay, I had an experience with this too as I was reading. Again, to the very tail end of my reading, page 34 here. I found this fascinating because I think it relates really well to the situation we find ourselves in right now, just culturally. Because Lewis here is talking about the war effort. Of course, he's writing this in the time of World War II. And he says about the subject, whichever, this is, again, the counsel being given from Screwtape, whichever he adopts, your main task will be the same. Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as a part of his religion. So, imagine yourself in a time of war, and in this particular case, World War II, people are going to divide between two different perspectives. On one end of the spectrum, it's pacifism. On the other, it's patriotism. And then let him, under the influence of partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part. Then quietly and gradually nurse him onto the stage at which his religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is valued chiefly because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of the British war effort or of pacifism. I look at our culture right now and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, we have a lot of tendencies in our own time and our own age and situation to say about COVID and everything that's happened this past year, to take a strong stance and then to kind of baptize it as, well, because this is the Christian perspective. Yeah. Obviously, you have to wear a mask at all times. Or this is the Christian perspective. Obviously, you cannot wear a mask. You need to be free and not fearful. You need to operate with faith. And so we can baptize whichever perspective we take and include it as a part of our faith. And therefore, if somebody has a different perspective, then it becomes this spiritual battle, which it's actually not.
Yeah, he kind of sums that up later in a sentence that says, if they must be Christians, let them at least be Christians with a difference.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like, ooh, there's a knife right to your heart.
Right. Totally.
Which is so true. We see that. It's like this was written current day.
Yeah.
That's why I love Lewis, because, it's well documented his friendship with Tolkien. And I'm a big fan of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
What?
Yeah, my close friends understand this very well in my life.
Nerd alert.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it's well documented but these men went through the first war together, not together, but they served in the first war.
Mm-hmm.
They saw good and evil and the realities of what was happening in World War II, and they lived through that as older men seeing younger men go off to war. So they really understand what's at stake, and they've actually lived in the trenches of World War I and survived, and then saw the implications of World War II and lived through those. In fact, C.S. Lewis went into the countryside to his country estate home, which most British and Europeans have, those summer type cottages.
Doesn't everyone?
I wish.
Just kidding.
Yeah, and our favorite town in Colorado would be awesome. But he actually took on several batches of children who were escaping London and the bombing raids of World War II, and there wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, which if you're a fan of this book, you've got to jump into the Chronicles of Narnia. It doesn't matter what age you are. They're going to speak to you. They're wonderfully written fiction books. And so that's why I really like C.S. Lewis, and I think he needs to be on your shelf as a Christian, is because he really lived through some of the most tumultuous times of the 20th century and had a really great reflections on them.
Yeah. I think that stood out to me further in the book too, and sort of as I thought about Calvary and how lucky we are to have such a wide span of generations here. And it's so sweet to see families that are coming to Calvary, that it's like the grandparents are coming because the kids started coming and the grandkids are also coming. And that's one thing that I love about coming to church here. But he talks about that later in the book and talks about the characteristic errors being corrected from one generation to another. So the things that we can learn from an older generation, and maybe the other way around, where older generations can become entrenched in a certain way of thinking, and being around the younger generation kind of opens that up. And I love that.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons why Lewis is also famous for his quote on, or his recommendation that you read old books every once in a while. He talks about the chronological snobbery that we can get into. Snubbery, whatever. Yeah. Anyways, and just the importance of learning from those earlier generations, like you're talking about, Melissa. And I think that is one of the strengths of our church. We have that great potential here to learn from people who are ahead of us in life, and we have so much that we can glean from their experience and, some of their wisdom that they have learned in cases the hard way, and just through decisions that they've made in the past that actually were difficult but great decisions, and we can see the fruit in their own lives and learn from it as we apply it to our own.
Yeah, it's really good. Cool. So, Melissa, my favorite question asked on this, especially this version of the podcast of what we are reading, is who should read this book and how should you read this book?
Great question.
And
Jay.
what context?
Harry, do you have anything to say about that?
I do have something to say about that. Yeah, about, I would say a year and a half ago or so, I read this to my kids. In fact, I wrote in the first page of this, Dear Elizabeth, Gabriel, and Micah. And then I wrote just a note to them about this book and its significance. That. And so we started reading this before bedtime, and they are now, Elizabeth is 16 and Gabe is 13, almost, he'll be 14 soon, and Micah is 11. And so they were about a year younger than they are now when we read this. And it was great, but it takes some prep time if you're going to read it to kids that are that age. And I didn't put in the prep time. So sometimes we'd be reading along and I'd be like, oh, I'm not exactly sure how to explain this. Yeah. If you're going to read it to your kids, I think it's an awesome thing to do, but just know that you may have to put in a little bit of time ahead of time to prep, because Lewis is a very intelligent man, and he's writing in a different era, even though it's not like it's completely out of grasp from our own lifetime, but it is a different era, and he writes in a different style that can sometimes be difficult for us to translate into our own vocabulary and way of understanding. So it's a great book for people of all ages, including kids, but just realize that if you're going to read it to your kids, you might have to put in some prep on the front side.
So maybe like a pre-read of the chapter. And then
Yeah.
we were talking about this earlier, kind of each chapter has its different struggle or vice that they're talking about. So you can think about what that looks like in current day that maybe your kids
Yeah.
could relate to. And that would be a conversation
Yeah.
starting jump point.
And this is not a bad time to Google your way to like the Spark Notes or summaries of
Or
each chapter.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you read it in a small group or in a book club, those are great and helpful for you to sort of understand where Lewis is going before you read the chapter.
Yeah. And then you had said on the Kindle,
Yeah.
there was a good resource for small group.
Yeah. So if you want to read it with your small group, which is a great recommendation here at Calvary, if you maybe do a summer reading as a small group, or your group is, just wanting to do something out of the box and completely different. In the Kindle version of the Screwtape Letters, there's a link to small group questions that were written by the publisher that are really helpful in understanding and adding to the conversation from chapter to chapter. And there's a lot of Christians who've written a lot of small group guides.
Yes.
So you can Google your way to small group questions there too.
That's great.
Yeah, it's worth your time.
Yeah, so
For
we
sure.
would recommend maybe a small group doing this or a book club.
Yeah.
Would that be your recommendation, Melissa?
It's great. I love it.
Yeah, and like you said, if you're going to do it, let us know. That'd be really fun to know who's actually reading the book or what groups are reading the book.
Yeah. Or if you want to borrow our book. I love Jay offered that with the first book that we read, and somebody took me up on it and borrowed a book. No,
That's
I
awesome.
was so excited.
That's great because that first book is out of print, actually.
Oh, really?
It's sold out on its first edition within
There you
like
go.
3 months.
That's so cool.
So yeah, that's really good. I'm glad you guys are tuning in to the weekly and just what this podcast is about providing some resources for you and your Christian bookshelf, because I think that's really important.
And do you think that book sold out because we talked about it on this podcast?
Definitely. No doubt. Everyone
Yeah.
at Calvary hit buy.
Yeah.
Not just Calvary.
And-
This goes out to the whole world, Jay.
Oh yeah, it's the whole
Yeah.
world, podcasting universe.
Is this live?
Yes.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But we're really glad you're tuning in. Perry, Melissa, thanks for being here today. If you got questions about the Screwtape Letters, don't hesitate to write the weekly at calvarybible.com. We look forward to hearing you from your reflections, emails, your recommendations on maybe books to read.
Yeah, we'd love that.
Melissa and I are talking about our summer reading list and maybe getting some of those on the podcast over the summer. So if you got a great Christian fiction,
We'd love to hear it.
yep. And I would recommend, if you're going to read C.S. Lewis, the Screwtape Letters are probably the second book you should read.
What's the first?
The Great Divorce is probably the first book you should read of C.S. Lewis. It's easy. It's fun. It's a blast. It's a fiction as well. And then Screwtape Letters and then Mere Christianity are probably the chronological order I would read C.S. Lewis. Any other recommendations, Perry?
No, I think that's good, Jay. It's good to have a little sequence in mind to read it. I did not read it in that order. I have not read The Great Divorce, although I've quoted from it, I believe, because it's so quotable. But yeah, I think it's good to have a sequence in mind, though.
Yeah. And if you're a parent out there and you're thinking about resources for your kids, if you go to the Chronicles of Narnia, Focus on the Family did the best production I've ever heard of a fiction series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
And you can go there and buy and you can get it on iTunes, actually.
Oh, nice.
So the Chronicles of Narnia. And we might actually
and then, didn't they make movies out of that too?
They did,
Right.
but the
Few.
books
Yeah.
and the Focus on the Families edition are the best.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is a great time to teach your kids that
Yeah.
the book is always better than the movie.
Really helpful
have
on
to
a
start
road trip,
early.
too.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 And maybe that should fall into our summer reading.
Maybe.
Chronicles of Narnia. All right, we love you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Know that we're always praying for you. And like we said, if you have any comments or questions, write the weekly at calvarybible.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Have a great St. Patty's Day.
Yeah.
Luck of the
Happy
Irish.
St. Patrick's Day.
Bye.
Bye.